Today, I'm excited to talk about the role of the product manager. I've been in product now for over 20 years, and despite that, we still don't have a de facto definition of the role of a product manager. It's easy to describe the role of an engineer. They write the code, obviously. It's easy to describe the role of a designer. They design the user experiences. But how exactly would you describe the role of the product manager? Now, over the years, a variety of product leaders have offered their own definitions for the role of a product manager. So I wanted to talk through three of the most popular definitions that I've come across over the years. The first one comes from Martin Eriksson, who's actually the founder of the Mind the Product community. And the way Martin describes the role of the product manager is this. He says the product manager operates at the intersection of business, technology, and user experience. You might have even come across the Venn diagram that he popularized around this, where you see business, technology, and a user experience, and then you see the little arrow pointing here. That's your role as the product manager. Now, what Martin offered was this idea that, hey, the role is actually pretty interdisciplinary. We have to do a little bit of all these things in the role of the product manager. Now, the second definition of a product manager that I want to talk about comes from Ben Horowitz, who at the time was a product leader at Netscape. While there, he wrote probably one of the most famous memos on product management called Good Product Manager, Bad Product Manager. And in that memo, he talks about this idea that a good product manager is the CEO of their product. And what he meant by that is a product manager takes accountability. They take ownership. They really are accountable for the results of delivering a product to our users and ultimately making that product successful. He said a bad product manager makes excuses for why the product didn't help. So that's what he meant by when he said CEO of the product. Now, in recent years, a lot of folks have critiqued that actual definition because it turns out, let's be honest, a PM doesn't actually have the authority like a CEO would. Personally, I like the analogy that a PM is more like the quarterback of the team instead of the CEO of the product, because that gets at this idea that it's really a role about influence without authority, not direct authority. But that's what he was trying to say when he said the product manager is the CEO of the product. The third definition of the role of the product manager comes from Marty Cagan, who's actually the author of a fantastic product management book called Inspired, as well as a few other books. Now, the way Marty talks about the role is he says the job of the product manager is to discover a product that is usable, valuable, and feasible. And what he's trying to get at is this idea that it needs to be valuable in terms of offering real value to the user. It has to be usable in terms of designed well. And finally, it has to be feasible in terms of we actually have to be able to build it with our technology. In some ways, he's sort of mirroring the ideas of Martin in terms of this interdisciplinary aspects of getting a product right. And so that's how Marty thinks about the role of product management. Now, I think each of these product leaders have added a bit to the discussion of what is the role of the product manager. But the challenge I've always had with each of these definitions is they don't really get at what does a product manager do on a day-to-day basis? What are actually the responsibilities of the product manager on a day-to-day basis? And so I wanted to offer my own definition of the role of the product manager because I think it really starts to get at those core responsibilities. So when I think about the role of the product manager, I say that the product manager drives the vision, strategy, design, and execution for their product. Now, it's all about those four core responsibilities, that vision, strategy, design, and execution bit that I talked about. And we'll talk about each of those in detail to give you a great sense of what those responsibilities are all about. But before I do, I want to call out kind of two other keywords in the definition I put together. The first is I said the product manager drives each of these things. Now, that was a deliberate word choice. I didn't say own. And the reason is because a PM is not doing these things in a silo. They're not coming up with all these things themselves. The PM role is highly collaborative. They're constantly working with their designers, engineers, marketers to actually come up with this stuff for their product. And so that's why drive is important, because they're driving the process, they're facilitating the process. And yes, ultimately they're making calls, but in collaboration with the broader team. Now, the other keyword I want to call out here is product. Now, what product means will depend on your role and scope within the organization. Maybe you're a junior PM and your product is in fact a feature or two. Maybe it becomes a bunch of features as you become more senior. Or ultimately, maybe you own an entire product. Product leaders, for example, often own suites of products. And so you'll see that word product really changes in terms of scope depending on where you are within the organization. All right, now I wanted to dive into the meat of that definition of the role of a product manager. This idea that the product manager drives the vision, the strategy, the design, and the execution for their product. Now, as we talk about each of these, I find one of the best ways to think about them is really through the lens of an exemplary product leader who actually does each of these well. Now let's dive into vision, the first core responsibility for a PM. Now, when I think about vision, the product leader that comes to mind is definitely Elon Musk. No one other than him has really put forth such ambitious visions for a variety of companies, whether it's SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink, or whatever new thing Elon Musk has going on. Now, what I love about it is he dreams big when he thinks about the vision for his companies. Take SpaceX. When you talk about the vision of SpaceX, Elon says, it is important for humanity to become an interplanetary species. Think about that. Think about how big and bold that vision in fact is. And that's when I think about the product role, to really think big, to be ambitious with the role. Now, it's one of these things where I'm constantly watching each of these Falcon launches that Elon is doing at SpaceX, and each time I really want them to stick the landing. And it's not because it's going to make it a little bit cheaper to, send astronauts up to the space station or, make it cheaper to deliver satellites to space. No. It's all about this. I'm rooting for SpaceX because I want to see us become an interplanetary species as well. And so that's the idea of vision. As a product manager, our responsibility is to articulate how the world will be a better place if we succeed. And that's this idea when we think about vision. Now, when we're doing this, we're doing things like coming up with a vision narrative. Some people talk about this idea of vision statements, but I believe really we gotta really let people dream a bit and kind of put it together in an entire narrative. And so that's what I'm talking about when I talk about the role of the product manager, is to focus on the vision. Next, let's talk about strategy. Now, when it comes to strategy, the person who comes to mind is Jeff Bezos for me, the founder of Amazon. Now, Jeff really exemplifies this idea of strategy because he's been so focused on this at Amazon. Amazon has been really the low-cost provider in the e-commerce space and made that their core strategy and faithfully executed against it. Now, the thing is, I love the way he describes that in this quote. He says, "Your margin is my opportunity." Now, what's interesting about that is so often here we're talking about this idea of, we want to have a profitable business. We want to have a high margin business. We want to have lots of gross profits. We're trying to drive those things up so that we can make more money for our shareholders and make a more viable business. Now, Bezos' strategy is very different. He's like, as soon as I get some margin, I'm giving that back to the user. In terms of lower prices, in terms of better service, in terms of higher quality in the actual products and services. And that's the cool strategy that they employ when he says, your margin is my opportunity. And so I love that they're so strategically focused. And what's amazing about Amazon is they have leveraged this actual strategy not only for e-commerce, but equally for cloud computing. It's kind of amazing that today Amazon is the leader in low-cost renting of servers, this cloud computing idea that we all know, and has effectively beat out Google and Microsoft in being the leader in that space. Again, leveraging a very clear strategy for why they will win. And so that's the idea. When I talk about strategy, it's all about basically detailing how you're going to win your market. Why are you, as your products and services, going to be the one to win the hearts and minds of customers in your space? And that's what we need to do as we're putting together our product strategy. Now, I love the format of putting together a product strategy map. And we'll talk in future videos about how to do exactly to do that. But it's basically this idea of we need to be exactly clear about what market we're playing in and how we're going to win that market. And so that's the idea of what a product manager is doing when they're thinking about that strategy dimension. The next dimension I want to talk about is design. Now, when we talk about design, the person who of course comes to mind is Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs is fantastic at what he was able to do in terms of designing incredible user experiences at Apple. And what I love about Steve Jobs is this quote, when he talks about really what makes this whole job of design hard. He says, we really need to work hard to get clean thinking to make it simple. And I think that's a really interesting insight when it comes to design. This idea that when we use products, often we're like, oh, that's simple, that's quite obvious, that's quite intuitive. But in fact, it took a lot of hard work to break it down, to get it that simple, to get it that easy to use. And when we're actually acting in that design responsibility as a PM, that's what we're trying to accomplish. And so what I think about as the role of a product manager in design is it's really trying to build a user experience that's useful, usable, and delightful. Right, we want people to actually want to use it because it's delivering real value. We want to make it really easy to use, that idea of making it usable. And ultimately, we aspire to, in fact, even evoke an emotion. Right, we want it to be delightful as people are engaging with our product's experiences. Now, as the product manager, of course, you're collaborating closely with your design team, but you have unique responsibilities as part of this collaboration. For example, the PM is often responsible for driving the roadmap. What features are we ultimately going to build to create this incredible design? They're often driving the product specs. What are the capabilities that we need in these feature sets to be successful? They're often driving a lot of the customer research to go understand customers so deeply so we can ultimately evoke those delightful emotional responses from our customers. And so that's the idea of driving design for the role of the product manager. Finally, let's talk about execution. Now, my favorite folks to talk about with execution is Stuart Butterfield, the founder of Slack. What's so fascinating about the Slack story is there was a bunch of messaging apps, group messaging apps that existed before Slack. But Slack actually executed flawlessly to build a really, really compelling experience that all of us know and love today. To the point of us now taking it for granted. Of course, any company we work for must have a great group messaging tool kind of like Slack. And I think about how they sweated the details. That's what the execution bit's all about. For example, a few years ago, I remember seeing this detailed flowchart showing how Slack decided when to send you a push notification. And it was this whole complicated chart where they basically tried to detect, are you sitting in front of your computer? Are you active in the computer? Okay, in that case, they'll send the notification to the Slack desktop app. Now, if you're not active or they detect that you're not responding there, then maybe they'll send it to the mobile device. But oh, by the way, they frequency cap it based on the level of messages and notifications you've gotten, and they take into account your preferences that you might have set for each of these channels. Now, that is pretty sophisticated, and that's what I mean by executing so well, sweating the details to make a really incredible product experience. And this quote from Stuart Butterfield kind of summarizes, in his own words, the way he likes to think about it. He says, we do it really, really fucking good. And that's the idea of kind of this execution. Now, the key here is that relentless execution is what ultimately enables you to make your vision reality. And that's the job as the product manager. In fact, product managers probably spend the majority of their time in this execution work. And this is everything from coming up with OKRs for the quarter and the goals that you guys are going to go after, to things like maybe even running scrum meetings to make sure that the engineers aren't bottlenecked by things. It's all the micro decisions that you have to make every day as a PM. Maybe the engineers find out, for example, something's going to be more costly to implement than they initially thought. Now you got to make those trade-off decisions. Do you still build it? What do you cut? Do you reduce the scope? Whatever it may be, to make sure that you still execute and deliver a delightful product experience. And that's the work when it comes to execution. So to wrap it up here, I like to think about the role of the product manager as driving the vision, strategy, design, and execution for their product. I hope this gives you a new way to think of what the role of product management is really all about.